Tonight, my quill whispers, and I, a scribe of the past, follow its fading echoes. Feel the weight of papyrus between my fingers, the scent of sacred incense curling through the air, and the Nile's warm breath swaying the linen drapes around me. The temple sleeps, but my heart, restless and full, remains awake. There are silences dancing between marble columns, and within them lie the words I never dared send. If these thoughts touch your heart, return to us once more, and whisper from where you listen. Here, where gold glitters less than a true gaze, and the gods chuckle softly beneath the palms, my soul pours itself into ink. Now lie down, breathe in the Nile's hush. Let us write together through a world of love and secrets. The oil lamp flickers beside me, casting soft shadows across the papyrus. Its flame dances gently, like the wavering edge of memory. Outside, the breeze carries the breath of the Nile, a sweet, humid whisper that slips past the stone lattice of my window and brushes my skin like your touch once did. This night is heavy with silence, but not the silence of peace. It is the kind that hums with what is unsaid. Alexandria has never been this still, not even in the depths of night, when even the market cats sleep and the priests whisper prayers to Isis with closed eyes. Tonight, the city holds its breath. The marble columns in the courtyard echo no footsteps. The musicians have tucked away their lyres, the dancers their anklets. There is no revelry now, only the quiet mourning of a kingdom awaiting its fate. I press my fingers to the edge of the papyrus, hesitating. How many times have I sat here in this same chamber, pen poised above parchment, wondering if I should write to you? And how many times have I let the ink dry without a word? But not tonight. The weight of this night demands words. If not to be sent, then at least to be written, to give shape to what festers inside me. You once told me that Alexandria shimmered like no other city you had seen, that her light was different, warmer, golden, like the desert sun pressed into stone. I wonder now if you would still say the same, with her streets emptied of laughter and the palace quiet like a tomb. The world outside this room feels brittle, as though one breath too strong might shatter it. There is incense burning near me, frankincense and blue lotus. You always said the lotus made you dream more vividly, that its fragrance clung to your skin even after you returned to the Roman camps. I keep it lit for you. Perhaps its scent will drift across the night and find you wherever you are. Perhaps it will tell you what I cannot say. The linen sheets are cool beneath me, and yet I feel heat in my chest. It rises from my ribs like steam from bathwater, this ache. I do not know if it is grief or longing or some blend of both, but it takes the shape of your name. I mouth it soft as a prayer, though the gods no longer listen. They are as tired as I am, as worn as the silk hanging in the doorways, fading in the sun. The statue of Isis watches me from across the room, her stone eyes unblinking. She is mother, goddess, protector. I have whispered countless offerings to her, but tonight I have no more honeyed words, only truths. If she is listening, then let her bear witness, not to a queen, but to a woman who writes because her heart is too full and the world too empty. Do you remember the last morning? Your cloak was dusted with sand. The sails of your ship flapped like wounded birds in the harbor wind. You kissed my hand, not my lips, and said nothing. There was too much between us for words to hold. And so you left, and I returned to this palace, carrying your silence like a stone tucked beneath my tongue. Even now, I taste it. Outside, the reeds sway at the river's edge. I can hear the water lapping against the dock stones, soft, rhythmic, like breath. The Nile does not mourn as I do. It moves forward, slow and patient, dragging its memories with it. I envy the river. It has no need to remember you. When the servants brought in figs this evening, I asked if any came from the grove where we once walked. They didn't know. That place was always secret, hidden beneath the olive trees, guarded only by time. It's strange what we choose to hide. Not armies, not power, but softness, vulnerability, the sound of your laughter when no one else could hear it. You were never only Roman to me, not when you looked at me without armor, not when you traced your fingers along the map of my wrist as if it held something sacred. I knew your ambitions, your allegiances, but I also knew the man who let down his guard beneath Egyptian stars. You said once that history would remember us. I wonder now how. As conquerors? As lovers? As fools? Will they tell our story with fire and betrayal, or with candlelight and longing? I cannot control what the future decides, but I can leave behind this letter, a murmur carved in ink. There are footsteps in the corridor, light, cautious. Perhaps another servant checking if I've slept. I haven't. I cannot. Sleep has become a luxury I no longer afford. My mind wanders too easily, drifting between memory and dread. I imagine you reading these words, even though I know you never will. That is the madness of grief. We speak to the shadows and call it hope. I am not writing as a queen tonight, not as the last pharaoh of Egypt. I write as the woman who waited on the rooftop for your return, who counted the sails on the horizon and whispered your name to the sky when there were none. The night deepens. I can feel the cold settling in my bones. Soon I will blow out the lamp, but not yet. Let me stay in this moment a little longer, suspended in the warmth of memory before the morning steals it away. My fingers tremble slightly, not from fear, but from the strain of holding everything in. I write because I must. Because words are all I have left to offer. And if the winds are kind, they will carry my sorrow down the river, across the sea, and into the space where your silence lives. Wherever you are, if you are, I hope the moonlight still touches your face gently. I hope, even now, you remember the softness of our nights. The chamber is filled with the scent of blue lotus and myrrh. It weaves through the air like silk unraveling, delicate and ancient. The priests say these perfumes open the way to the gods, that the soul floats easier in their presence. I wonder, if the gods walk among us, can they smell our longing? I light the incense slowly, with reverence, not as a ritual of worship, but as a memory. You always lingered near when the lotus burned. You said it reminded you of dusk in Alexandria, of heat pressing against marble, of the way my voice softened at the end of a sentence. There are moments when I still expect to hear your footsteps at the threshold, drawn in by that same fragrance, but the doorway remains empty. When the smoke curls upward, I imagine it reaching you. Perhaps it finds its way through time, through distance, drifting between realities, whispering secrets only the heart can understand. I speak through the flame, through the haze, in the language of scent and silence. The last time we were together, the air smelled of sea salt and musk. We stood too close, not touching, but tethered by everything unsaid. You smelled of sun-warmed leather and the sand from the desert winds. I wanted to memorize it all, your breath, your nearness, but fear laced every heartbeat. We had become two nations in the shape of people, held together by threadbare trust and the echo of something once pure. And still I burned the incense, even as Rome's eyes watched us, even as the Senate sharpened its knives with words and gold. I lit it. I imagined it warding off betrayal, as if scent could protect us. But perfumes are not shields. They only mask what festers beneath. Tonight, the scent does not protect. It reveals. I sit before the brazier, watching the tiny coils of smoke dance like cobras. They move with grace, with purpose. You always said there was magic in how Egypt moved, how we did not rush, how we let the air breathe. Rome was thunder, you said. Egypt, thunder's dream. You admired our stillness, our mystery. Yet you remained thunder. Even when you whispered, your voice was always followed by storms. You once gifted me oils from the east, amber, rose, and sandalwood. They were rich, almost too bold. I preferred the subtle aroma of desert herbs and papyrus, of baked stone and honey. You joked that I smelled like a temple. I told you it was better than smelling like a battlefield. You laughed, and the sound still lives somewhere in the corners of this room. It's strange, isn't it, how memory hides in the air, how a single scent can unlock a world. Tonight, I find myself surrounded by a palace of smells. The worn leather of scroll bindings, the tang of bronze torches, the faint metallic breath of the Nile, drifting in like the tide of time. These are my companions now, not courtiers, not dancers, only ghosts and aromas. I pressed perfume into the linens tonight, as if your body would find them. I know it won't, but the act comforts me, as if I am preparing for your arrival rather than mourning your absence. In truth, I do not know where you are, alive or fallen, free or bound. The messengers are slow, or perhaps silenced. I have only whispers from the docks, shadows cast by fear and fire. Once I knew your every movement. I felt your presence days before your arrival, like a changing wind. Now I light the incense not for connection, but for direction. Like a prayer on smoke, I release my longing to the sky. Do you remember the morning you first wrote my name? You carved it into a fig tree with your dagger, just above the water's reach. I traced it later with my fingers. The bark was still warm from the sun. That tree is gone now, flooded or cut. Time is careless with sacred things. But I remember. I will always remember. When I walk the palace gardens now, the lilies bow with the weight of dust. The fountains trickle with hesitation. Even the birds do not sing as they once did. Perhaps they too feel the absence. Or perhaps it is I who has changed, who has become so steeped in mourning that the world echoes my emptiness. The high priest said today that the stars are in retreat, that the gods have turned their gaze from Alexandria. I wonder if it is punishment for ambition, For defiance? Or simply for loving you too well? It is easy to blame the stars. They are distant and unanswering, like all things I now desire. The scent thickens in the room. I let it. I inhale deeply, even though it stings. There is comfort in the pain. It reminds me that I still live, still feel. That despite the veils of royalty and ritual, I am still a woman aching in the dark. My crown sits untouched on the pedestal. It gleams, but it is empty of meaning tonight. I wonder if you remember the smell of my hair after bathing in jasmine water. You used to bury your face there, saying it reminded you of something you couldn't name. I never asked what. I feared the answer might be another woman, another city, another life. But I think now it was none of those. I think it was hope. Something you no longer allowed yourself to touch. We built our story like a temple without walls, grand but exposed. The wind walked through it freely, and now that wind carries away what little remains. If this letter finds you in dreams, let the scent be your guide. Let it lead you back to the chamber where I wait, to the woman who once placed oil upon your skin, not as queen to general, but as lover to beloved. The incense burns low now. The ash curls like a question at the bottom of the bowl. And still I write, because longing does not end when a door closes. It lingers, in smoke, in silence, in scent. There was a time when the Nile was our confidant, its wide, ageless current carrying the weight of our whispers like sacred offerings. We never needed words when we were near its banks. The wind would braid itself into your voice, and the ripples would finish my sentences. There, beneath the date palms and sycamores, we became neither queen nor conqueror, but only two souls unguarded, soft under the watching sky. I remember the first time you met me there, not as emissary of Rome, but simply as a man. You wore no armor, only a linen tunic stained from the heat of the day, and a blue sash that fluttered at your waist like river silk. You looked younger, almost uncertain. I offered you honeyed figs, and you smiled with a slowness that I came to love, like dawn reaching across water. That moment, that smile, never left me. The stone you sat on is still there, smoothed now by the years and the tides, but I see you in its shape. The reed boat we once rowed, the one the fishermen mocked for its elegance, is long gone. Still, when the river is quiet and the moon full, I can almost hear the soft splash of the oar, the rhythm of your breath beside mine. And once, just once, I believed I saw our reflection in the water, intact, undisturbed. A trick of memory, perhaps, but no less precious. We spoke little during those twilight hours. Words felt too heavy, too mortal. You once traced the scar on my wrist, and I told you it came from climbing the temple steps barefoot as a child. You touched it as if it were a sacred inscription. I never told anyone else that story, not even my own priests. I think now of all the pieces of myself I gave you, quietly, willingly, without realizing how sacred they were until they were gone. You brought Roman wine with you one night, and we laughed as it spilled on the sand. The gods looked away, pretending not to see. You said that wine should not be caged in goblets, but set free to mix with earth and sky. I remember watching the crimson soak into the ground, wondering if even the soil would remember us. The Nile remembers. It remembers your voice murmuring verses of Virgil you thought I would not understand, but I did. I understood far more than I ever admitted. I understood that you were afraid, not of me, but of yourself, of how much of yourself you were beginning to see in my eyes. You feared what would happen if you ceased to be Roman long enough to simply be a man in love. We hid nothing from the river, not your shame, not my doubts, not the gentle cruelty of the future pressing in from every direction. Rome would never allow what we dreamed beside those waters. They wanted you whole and hard and unbroken. But you left parts of yourself on those shores, pieces that I now carry like sacred stones, heavy in my hands. I remember one evening, the air so still the lanterns didn't sway. You turned to me and said, "Cleopatra, if the Nile were a road, I would follow it into death if it led to you." I laughed, brushing your cheek, telling you death would find us anyway. It was not a prophecy, only a truth we tried to make beautiful. Sometimes I return to that place alone. The papyrus stalks still wave gently, though the songs of children have quieted. I kneel where we once lay, the ground still warm from the sun. I whisper your name into the earth, not expecting an answer. But the river murmurs back, not in words, but in rhythm. It tells me I am not forgotten. And yet I feel forgotten. Here in this palace, surrounded by golden bowls and ivory combs, by scribes who lower their heads and servants who speak in hushed tones, I am most alone when I remember what we had. They all fear what comes. They speak of alliances, betrayals, distant ships. But I think only of that shoreline, of your shadow bending over mine as the stars watched, curious and cruel. Even the crocodiles seemed kinder back then.
They would surface near us as if listening, their ancient eyes reflecting our closeness. You joked that they were my guardians, sent to ensure you behaved. I think now they were witnesses, silent, scaly priests of the Nile, holding vigil over something greater than empire. Do you recall the blue stone you gave me? It was smooth as glass, veined with white like a map of the heavens. You said it was Roman, but I told you it belonged to the river now. I dropped it into the current that night, not in anger, not in loss, but as a promise, that even if you left, some part of us would drift forever in those waters. I dream of that stone sometimes, of it catching the sunlight just before it sinks, still warm from our hands. I wonder if you dream of it too, or if dreams have become a luxury you can no longer afford. Now the waters are restless, the tides are strange. The fishermen say the Nile groans in the mornings, as if burdened. They do not know what it carries. They do not know it cradles the memory of a queen and her Roman, two souls who dared to love beyond what the world would allow. Perhaps one day someone will sit by that same bank and feel something they cannot name, a shiver, a pull, a sorrow. They will not know why, but it will be us, a trace, a breath, a sigh carried by the river. You said history would judge us, but the Nile will not. The Nile remembers, and that is enough for me tonight. I write this now not to plead, nor to rewrite what cannot be unwritten, but to reflect in quiet honesty how you were pulled, how you became the rope in the great tug of empire, between the eagle of Rome and the lotus of Egypt. You tried to belong to both, but even the strongest man tears when bound to thrones forged in different fires. You once stood before me in full armor, your breastplate polished like obsidian, your cape stiff with wind and salt. You spoke of duty, of honor, of the Senate and Caesar's legacy. But I saw it then, the flicker in your eyes, the fatigue behind the pride. Rome was not a mother to you. She was a mistress with sharp teeth, and every kiss left you bleeding. And still, you returned to her. Each time I held you, I felt her shadow coiled around your spine. You wore it like a second skin. You would tell me, half in jest, that I was your escape from politics. But even as your hand traced the curve of my shoulder, your mind calculated alliances and troop movements. I was not blind. I only chose to love you anyway. In the halls of my palace, they speak of you in lowered voices. Some praise you for your strength, for how you held Rome's gaze like a lion does a hunter. Others curse your name for dragging Egypt into your storms. I remain silent, not because I agree or disagree, but because no one understands the man I knew, the man who, in the stillness between campaigns, read poems in Greek and asked me about the stars. You were caught between two gods, Mars and Isis, between the sword and the feather. You wore both with pride, and yet neither fit. Rome demanded war. Egypt offered dreams. You wanted both, and in wanting both, you doomed us all. I often wonder, had you not met me in Tarsus, would you still have fractured? Or was it inevitable that your heart would be split across lands that could never merge? The world praises loyalty, but punishes divided love. You became the emblem of ambition torn in two, and I, perhaps, its mirror. My advisors urged me to stay distant from you. They spoke of my predecessor, Caesar, and the lessons I should have learned. But I was not a student of caution. I was a daughter of the Nile, raised beneath constellations older than Rome itself. My heart did not bow to strategy. It rose like the floodwaters, wild and full. When you brought Roman troops into Alexandria, the people watched with wary eyes. You tried to make it seem ceremonial, a gesture of peace, but the temples trembled.
The old priests said the gods turned their backs that day. I disagreed. I thought the gods were watching more closely than ever. There is a painting in one of the corridors, the one of a falcon flying over two mountains. You once said it reminded you of your place between Caesar's heir and me. You laughed then, but it was a hollow laugh. I think you knew, even then, that no flight can last forever. The wings tire, the sky darkens. I remember the nights when news would arrive from Rome, scrolls sealed in wax, brought in haste. You would open them with shaking hands, your jaw clenched, eyes scanning for betrayal. Each word chipped away at the peace we tried to build. First, it was Octavian's whispers, then accusations, then fleets. You hated him, not because he was young or shrewd, but because he knew how to turn love into weakness. He knew that in loving me, you had exposed the one part of yourself that Rome could use as a weapon, and he struck without mercy. Still, you tried to protect us. You told me once that Rome could never understand Egypt's soul, that to them we were myth dressed in silk, not flesh and blood. You tried to make them see otherwise, but myths are harder to change than armies.
In public, we performed strength. We walked side by side, draped in gold, our heads high, our hands linked like sovereigns of an eternal dawn. But in the quiet, I saw the fraying. I saw how your fingers trembled when you thought no one watched. I kissed them one by one, as if that might stitch the pieces back. But love is not thread. There were nights you spoke of leaving it all. Let us sail east, you said once, beyond the edge of their maps. Let Egypt be a dream they cannot touch. I smiled, even as my heart ached. I knew you would never go. The iron of Rome was too deep in your bones. And now, here I sit, the world narrowing around me, your name the only thing left that does not change. They speak of defeat as if it has already arrived. Perhaps it has. Perhaps it came the day you tried to be both lion and dove, and the sky tore to punish you. There is a stone in the courtyard, flat, white, veined with cracks. We used to sit there in early summer, watching the sun melt over the harbor. You'd speak of ships and stars and how you envied the freedom of birds. I told you freedom is never given, only taken. You nodded, but we both knew you were already too bound. I trace that stone now with bare feet, remembering. The weight of your presence still lingers, a pressure in the air like a storm just past. You belonged to two worlds, but in trying to serve both, you lost your place in either. I do not blame you. I do not absolve you. I only remember you, clearly, painfully, lovingly. As the man who reached for my hand while Rome pulled at your sword. As the man who whispered my name, not in conquest, but in confession. I do not know how many letters I have written you that never reached your hands. Their ink has dried on papyrus, now lost in the brazier's breath, in the fire that devours what the heart cannot bear to send. Perhaps this one will suffer the same fate. Perhaps it already knows. Each letter began the same way, with your name, softly written, as if my hand feared the weight of it. I would sit beside the open window, the Nile whispering just beyond, and begin to pour my thoughts onto the page. And always, at some point, I would stop. The truth would gather too tightly in my chest. My fingers would tremble, the words would blur, and the silence would grow too loud to ignore. There is a drawer beneath my writing table. You once opened it and found fragments of what I could never say aloud. I laughed then and told you they were nothing, but you read them anyway, piecing together lines like broken mosaics. You said they were beautiful. I said they were unfinished. You kissed my forehead and left them untouched. But you knew. Even silence has a scent, and mine was always soaked in fear. Why was it easier to love you in the spaces between sentences? I wonder if you ever did the same, took quill to parchment and wrote words you never meant to send. Were there moments in your tent, your warship, your chambers in Rome, where you whispered to the empty air as if it could carry your voice to me? Did your silence also throb with what was withheld? There is a cruelty in the unsent, a kind of mourning that has no funeral. These letters are not born, they are buried. I remember one morning, after we argued about Caesarion's future, I returned to my quarters and began to write. My hand was tight with fury, my words sharp as obsidian. But halfway through, I softened. Not because I forgave, but because I remembered your face as you watched our son sleep. The crease between your brows disappeared in those moments. You became a man again, not a soldier. I could not send the letter. I tore it into strips and fed it to the oil flame. Another night, I tried to write only of joy. I described the birds nesting near the reflecting pool, the scent of almond blossoms, the way the moonlight curved through the stone columns like a ribbon. I wanted to give you something light, something untouched by empire. But even that letter ended with longing. It ended with absence. I folded it, then unfolded it, over and over until the creases blurred the ink. Then I let it fall behind the tapestry. It's probably still there, gathering dust, unread. My maids once found scraps of a note and asked if it was a draft of a treaty. I smiled. Let them think that. Let them believe their queen's pen only crafts alliances and edicts. Let them not know that beneath these walls lie dozens of love letters in ruins. Let them never guess how fragile power becomes in the presence of missing words. Even now, as I write to you in full honesty, I do not know if this letter will survive me. The scrolls in the library of Alexandria burn slowly, wrapped in cedar to preserve them.
But no cedar can preserve what was never spoken aloud. No scribe can archive a confession unsent. I have asked myself over and over, what held me back? Why did I not send these words when the blood was still warm, when your hand might have reached for mine across the sea? Was it fear that they would make you hesitate? Or worse, that they would not move you at all? Perhaps I feared the weight of your indifference more than I feared war. Even now, there are things I hesitate to write. The truth is not always gentle. It does not always fit into elegant phrasing or poetic metaphors. Sometimes it is jagged, sometimes it bleeds, and sometimes it is too late. I think of ink as a kind of wound. It stains, it leaves marks, it reminds. And so these letters, torn, hidden, burned, are not failures, they are scars. You once asked me why I kept writing if I never sent them. Because, I said, they make me feel close to the you I remember. That you is not the general, not the statesman, but the man who asked me if stars ever envied mortals for being able to touch. I told you yes. That was the only lie I ever truly wanted to be true. Now the palace is quieter. The steps of messengers echo longer in the halls. News is scarce. Rumors come in place of facts. They say you have withdrawn, that your men grow restless, that Octavian is closing in. I wait for your reply to nothing, to these ghost letters folded and vanished. I imagine you receiving them in dreams, faint shapes of my words drifting into your sleep like the scent of myrrh. I hope they stir something in you, even if you do not know why. Tonight, I place this letter beneath my pillow, as I have done before. The ink is still wet. It may smear as I turn in restless sleep, but I do not care. Let it smudge. Let it bleed. Let the truth become a part of my skin. I am not asking you to come back. I am not asking for forgiveness. I only wish to be remembered in your silences. To be the voice that lingers when the world grows quiet, and all you hear is the sound of the sea between your breaths.
There is a particular silence that follows your departure. It is not merely the absence of sound, but a vacuum where something sacred once lived. The night does not simply return to stillness. It changes shape. It stretches wider, becomes heavier, as if mourning your absence alongside me. I used to listen for your footsteps long after you were gone. I would sit near the window, the curtains drawn against the cool air, straining to hear the soft cadence of your sandals across the stone. Foolish, perhaps, but when the heart aches, it invents echoes. The last time you left, the halls remained quiet for 3 days. Even the servants moved like shadows. The marble beneath my feet was colder than I remembered. I followed your path through the palace, hand brushing the walls, searching for the warmth your presence always left behind. But the corridors had already forgotten you. Only I remained, remembering everything. I recall how you always turned your head slightly before walking away. Not fully, just enough for me to see the curve of your jaw, the tension in your throat. A small gesture, yet I clung to it as a signal that somewhere inside you wanted to stay. But Rome always called louder than I did. There is a scent that lingers after you go. Not incense, not oils, but something else, like leather warmed by sun, like parchment and salt and something uniquely yours. I could smell it on the pillows, on the cloaks left behind. It faded slowly, as if reluctant to leave me completely. I clutched at it like a child, breathing it in until it disappeared. I never told you this, but I used to sleep in your robes when you were away. Not for comfort, but for memory, as if the folds still held your voice, as if I could curl into them and find you waiting in some quiet pocket of fabric and thread. The Nile, too, felt your absence. When you were near, it seemed calmer, as though it recognized a soul who understood its moods. But after your departure, the waters grew more restless. The fishermen said the fish fled upstream. I nodded, pretending not to understand the deeper meaning. They did not know you had become the tide for me. Do you remember the night we stood in the garden before you left for the Eastern campaign? The moon was full, casting silver over the lotus pool. You held my hand but said nothing. I remember thinking, how do I hold a moment that refuses to speak? You kissed my temple, and then you were gone. I stood there until the dawn melted the stars. I could still feel your lips hours later, like a brand pressed into time. The guards say I sleep poorly when you are away. They are correct. Sleep eludes me. It brushes past, teasing, then disappears like your ship on the horizon. In your absence, the palace becomes a shrine of half-lived moments. The chairs where you sat, the goblet you favored, the books you left open, all of it becomes sacred, untouched, too holy for the living. I speak your name aloud sometimes, just to hear it spoken. In the baths, as steam clouds the mirrors. In the gardens, beneath the whisper of palms. In the great library, between scrolls of forgotten kings. Your name is a prayer, a tether, a rebellion against forgetting. They ask me why I have not married again, why I remain alone, with only the walls and the Nile and the weight of memory. I smile. Let them wonder. Let them believe I am still calculating alliances or holding out for power. The truth is far simpler. No one else walks the halls the way you did. No one else lingers in my bones. I remember when you told me departures were necessary, that without leaving there could be no returning. You believed in the rhythm of absence and arrival, but you never knew what it did to me. Each time you left, I unraveled, not all at once, but thread by thread, quietly, gracefully.
Like silk unraveling in the wind. Once I thought I would grow stronger in your absence, that each departure would teach me to hold myself more tightly. But I was wrong. Love does not strengthen in silence. It stretches, thins, becomes translucent. Still beautiful, but fragile, trembling, always at the edge of tearing. Even now, I pace the veranda where we once watched the harbor lights flicker. I count the ships. None bear your flag. The night wind tastes of seawater and longing. Somewhere out there, you move through other nights, beneath other stars, and I remain, anchored in this palace of memory. I wonder, when you left, did you feel me pulling against your spine? Did the hem of your cloak drag through my grief? Or were you already gone before your feet crossed the threshold? Sometimes I imagine you hesitating outside the palace gates, heart pounding, torn between duty and desire. But maybe that is just another story I tell myself. Maybe you walked away easily, shoulders squared, eyes set ahead. And yet, I remember the time you returned unannounced. No fanfare, no guards, just you, covered in dust, eyes tired. You walked straight into my chambers and collapsed at my feet. I couldn't sleep, you said. The silence was too loud. That night, I held you like a secret. We said nothing. There was no need. I think of that night often. I hold it tightly when sleep refuses me. I cradle it like a flame in the dark. Because in the end, it is not the grand farewells that haunt me. It is the quiet moments before the door closes. It is the pause in your breath, the weight of your hand as it slipped from mine, the space between our eyes as you turned away. These are the nights I cannot forget. These are the echoes I cannot silence. Voices of the palace and shadows of power. Even the servants whisper of our fate. This palace, once filled with song and scent and silk, has become a chamber of murmurs.
The corridors carry voices not meant for me, and the shadows grow longer with each passing dusk. The walls still hold their gold, the columns still rise proud and polished, but everything feels brittle, as if one word too loud, one breath too daring might crack the foundation. They speak of you when they think I cannot hear. They whisper your name not with reverence now, but with caution. The Roman, they say, as if saying Antony might summon ghosts. They wonder if you will return, if you will bring war or surrender. They ask if I will fall with you, or if I have already fallen. The cooks, the scribes, the torchbearers, I see them exchanging glances. Even the high priests hesitate in their rituals. They no longer know if the gods favor me. I walk among them, draped in linen finer than starlight, head held high, but their eyes skim past me, unsure if I am a queen or a question. I cannot blame them. power hums differently now. It does not rise from the floor, from the thrones or altars. It sinks, subtle, uncertain, like a tide turning without warning. You used to tell me that Egyptian politics were like the Nile, winding, hidden, slow to show their depth. But now I think it is the Roman storm that clouds everything. Octavian's name moves through these halls like an invisible draft, cool, unnerving, unwelcome. His messages come sealed in arrogance. Each scroll bears not just news, but weight. I open them with fingers steady, but a heart that clenches like a fist. They say he calls me temptress, that I've bewitched you, that your failures are my doing. I wonder if he believes it, or if it is simply easier to point to a foreign queen than to admit his rival is more than man. What they forget is that I do not need to cast spells. My words are enough, my silence even more so. And yet my power has never shielded me from fear. I see the way the viziers speak now, in layers, praise woven with doubt, warnings masked as flattery.
They remind me of my lineage, of the gods who placed me on this throne, but their eyes ask, how long until Rome takes it from you? Some counsel surrender. They use gentler words, negotiation, realignment, preservation. They do not understand that I am not only a ruler, I am a symbol. If I kneel, Egypt kneels. If I fold, she folds. And if I die with dignity, then perhaps this land, our land, will remember its worth, even as the world forgets mine. There is a mirror in the audience chamber, tall, framed in lapis and ivory. You once stood behind me, both of us reflected there. You touched my shoulder and said, "Even if the world turns its back, you will never vanish. You are etched into its silver." I try to believe that still, but the mirror feels colder now. I see not a queen, but a woman waiting to be erased. Do you remember the peacock mosaic near the north colonnade? The one you admired so deeply? It has begun to fade. The tiles loosen one by one, as if the wall has tired of beauty. I sometimes stand before it, wondering which tile will be the last to fall. A metaphor, perhaps, for all I've tried to hold together. There are fewer banquets now. The music halls sit silent. The air is thicker with expectation than perfume. And yet, every evening I dress for dinner, as if nothing has changed. I choose my jewelry carefully, lapis, carnelian, gold shaped like falcon wings. I sit in the great hall, my back straight, eyes forward. I wait. Some nights I imagine you walking in again, unapologetic, dust on your cloak, laughter in your voice. The servants would freeze, the musicians would fumble, and I would rise, not because a ruler enters, but because the man I loved has come home. But you do not come. Instead, the palace creaks with memories. The wind moves through it as if remembering your stride. The torches burn lower. The steps echo longer. The throne, too, grows cold beneath me. I've begun to speak with the statues. Isis, Horus, Bastet. They do not reply, but their silence is more honest than the flattery of men. I light incense before them, not for answers, but to remind myself that someone is watching.
that even if the world conspires to forget me, the gods will not. You told me once that politics was theater, that we were always performing, always cloaked in roles. But what happens when the audience leaves? When the actors forget their lines? When the stage begins to rot? I'll tell you, the truth seeps in. And the truth is this: I am tired. Not of ruling, not of the burden, but of the waiting, of the pretending, of holding up a world that grows heavier each time your name is spoken with less certainty. There are scrolls on my table, maps, lists, treaties. I read them by candlelight. I imagine what could have been if the world were not so cruel to those who love across borders. I wonder if you read your scrolls with the same ache, or if yours have already turned to dust. Still, I do not despair, not fully, because somewhere in this palace, beneath the layers of whispers and dust, your voice remains. In the garden where you laughed, in the library where you argued about Greek philosophy, in the room where you once slept, arm thrown carelessly over your brow, like a man unburdened by empire. The palace is no longer mine alone. It belongs now to what was, to what waits, to what will never be again. It is a house of echoes, and you are the loudest of them. They can whisper all they like. They can doubt and question and conspire. But I remember. I remember who you were beneath the armor. And if memory is the last power I possess, then I will wield it like a blade of glass. Even in the silence, even in the dark, even when the throne turns to dust beneath me. They sleep soundly tonight, though the world trembles just beyond these walls. Caesarion lies, with one hand curled under his cheek, his lips parted in a breath so soft it almost vanishes into the silence. The twins, Alexander and Selene, are tangled together like vines, warm and dreaming beneath linen too fine for war. And while the kingdom I once ruled fades at the edges, they remain untouched for now. I often wonder what they dream of. Do their minds still float in the innocence of gardens and stories? Or has the weight of their lineage begun to press down on them? I often wonder to shelter them from the politics, the fear, the shifting tides. But children are not blind. They feel what we will not speak. They read it in our pauses, in the way we hold them tighter when the sky grows too quiet. When I look at Caesarion, I see your shoulders, the same proud tilt, the same stubborn line of the jaw. He is not yours by blood, but he carries your legacy as surely as if he had come from your body. You never resented him, not truly. You watched him from across the room with a gaze you tried to mask in indifference, but I saw it. You loved him, quietly, as only a man torn in many directions can love a boy he did not make, but came to claim anyway. Alexander has your laugh, not always, but in those rare moments when something truly surprises him, when he forgets to be royal. He sounds just like you, in the garden, barefoot and laughing after dropping a fig into the pond. Selene is sharp as obsidian. She watches me with eyes too old for her years. When she asks where you've gone, I give her stories, not answers. She does not believe them,
but she allows me the lie. They do not know what waits beyond the horizon. They do not yet understand how thin the veil is between palace and prison. I teach them to walk with grace, to speak with conviction, to bow only to what is sacred. But I also teach them to question, to listen for the truth hidden beneath honeyed words. It is a fragile balance, preparing them for a world that may never be theirs to rule. Sometimes I find Alexander drawing maps, his little fingers tracing lines of coastlines he's never seen.
He names places I've spoken of: Parthia, Rome, Hispania. His imagination is vast, and I do not clip its wings. But I fear the day when those maps become destinations, when his eyes shift from wonder to conquest. I want better for him, for all of them. And yet, how can I promise peace when I cannot even promise tomorrow? The scribes ask what legacy I wish to leave them. I say memory, not of triumphs carved in stone or coins stamped with their profiles, but memory that lives in the way they hold each other, the way they speak kindly to those with no power, the way they love without shame or armor. If I can give them anything, let it be the permission to feel deeply, even in a world that punishes tenderness. You once said you never expected to be a father, that love was dangerous enough without responsibility. But I saw you change, slowly, awkwardly, beautifully. You began leaving small gifts for them: wooden animals, sea glass, bits of stories wrapped in Latin and laughter. You never spoke of it, but I noticed. They noticed too. Alexander still sleeps with the carved lion you gave him, the one whose tail broke and was carefully repaired with gold thread. Celine keeps the bronze coin from your campaign tucked in her robes, pretending it is simply for luck. Caesarion stands straighter when your name is spoken, though he says nothing. He listens. He remembers. In them you continue, not as legend, not as general, but as father, as man. I do not know what the world will make of them, if they will be seen as heirs or threats, if they will be used as pawns, or if they will rise as something more. But I will guard their dreams for as long as I can. I will build a fortress of lullabies and silence, of whispered stories and nighttime prayers. And when the storm comes, as it always does, I will stand before them like a wall of wind. Because they are not merely ours. They are the proof that we existed, that love was real even amid the wreckage. Sometimes I think of a future where they find this letter, where these words, written in candlelight and salt, drift across generations and fall into their hands. I hope they see us not as symbols, not as lovers swallowed by history, but as people, flawed, fierce, afraid. I hope they understand that every decision, every risk, every silence was born from love, more complex than words can hold. If they ever ask me who you were, I will not begin with titles. I will not say Marcus Antonius, triumvir of Rome. I will say, he was the man who touched my hand like it held the sun. He was the man who gave your laughter to you. Tonight, I kissed their foreheads and lingered a little longer than usual. They smelled of milk and sleep and something ancient, something that reminded me of us before the wars, before the crowns, before the sea became a distance we could not cross. They sleep as you once did, tangled in dreams and linen, and I sit in the silence they leave behind, watching their chests rise and fall, holding on to this moment like a shoreline before the tide takes it back. The city is holding its breath. Each morning I walk the high balcony before the sun rises, hoping, perhaps foolishly, to see your sails breaking the horizon. The mist hovers low over the water, veiling the harbor in a soft hush, as though the Nile itself has paused in reverence or dread. The gulls fly low, circling the masts of anchored vessels like restless spirits, and still there is no sign of your return. The generals come with scrolls and maps. They speak in careful tones, weighed by the tension of a losing war. I listen, nod, ask the right questions, but my mind is elsewhere. I trace your roots in my memory, through the Ionian, the Aegean, the red lines we once drew together by candlelight. The lines now blur with ash and time. You are somewhere out there, fighting, they say, or fleeing, or, like me.
There's a strange comfort in imagining you beneath the same stars, perhaps reading the same sky. We used to sit for hours studying the constellations, your finger pointing out shapes I never could quite see. There, you'd say, the lion, the serpent, the goddess. And I'd pretend to find them just to hear you speak again. Now the stars seem colder. They blink like indifferent eyes, watching history without favor or grief. Alexandria has changed in your absence. The streets are quieter. The laughter that once floated through the bazaars has dulled. The perfumers and poets still open their shops, but their voices are strained, their smiles brittle. Everyone waits, not just for you, but for what follows, for the sound of foreign boots against sacred stone, for banners that are not ours to rise above the columns. Each knock at the gate, each gallop of hooves makes the palace still. Is it you, or is it the end? I know I should be planning, reinforcing the defenses, bargaining with dignitaries, arranging escape if it comes to that. But my hands resist. They find parchment only to write to you. They hold weapons only in dreams. The war has become a fog, one that creeps not across the land, but into the lungs, into the heart. They say Octavian grows bold, that he believes you weakened by love, undone by a woman. They speak of it with amusement, as if affection were a failing, as if passion were something to be outgrown. I wonder what love they've ever known, if they cannot see it for what it truly is, not a weakness, but a reason to resist destruction. I do not regret us, even now, even with ships burning beyond the horizon, even with my throne crumbling beneath prophecy and sword. What we built together was more than war. It was a refusal, a defiance, a flame lit not to conquer, but to illuminate. Still, I ask myself, why didn't you send word? Even a single line, one symbol, the drawing of an anchor, a falcon, a sun, anything. Anything. I imagine you penning a letter and stopping mid-sentence, like I have so many times. I imagine your hand hesitating over my name. I imagine the candle burning low, the ink drying, the words unfinished.
Perhaps that is what war does. It severs the thread between hearts first, then between cities. But this city waits for you, as I do. The people have begun lighting candles along the docks at night, not for celebration, but for hope. Tiny flames in clay bowls, bobbing on the water. From the balcony, they look like stars fallen into the Nile, reaching toward you. I watch them drift, whispering your name into the dark. Some nights, I believe the river listens. I walk the length of your old chamber each day. The scrolls remain as you left them, open to the passages you quoted most. The sword you leaned against the wall has not been touched. The cloak you left on the back of the carved chair still holds your scent, fainter now, but there. I told no one to clean the room. It is not a shrine. It is a promise. Your dog, yes, that stubborn creature you found half-starved near the armory, he waits too. He scratches at your door each dusk, whines, then curls at the threshold. The servants tried to move him once. He snapped. I understood. I feel the same fury when someone touches what remains of you. There are rumors, of course, that you have surrendered, that you have fallen, that you prepare to betray me to save your name. I do not listen, not because I trust blindly, but because I trust completely. I have seen the fear in your eyes, the grief, the ache to do right by both your homeland and your heart. I know how that tore you. But I also know the man who stood beside me as Alexandria bloomed beneath our joined rule. The man who knelt not before a throne, but before our children. The man who kissed me as if the war could not touch us. If you are gone, say so. If you live, come home. If you are captive, I will find you. But if you have forgotten me, truly, completely, then let the Nile take me before morning. Let her waves swallow my name, so it may never fall from your lips with indifference. Until then, I wait, with every candle lit, with every tide that rises, with every breath drawn beside a window where your shadow once stood. Alexandria breathes as if waiting for you, and I, no longer queen, no longer soldier, am simply a woman, writing to the silence, hoping it will answer back. I write now with no certainty that these words will find you. Perhaps you have already fallen, sword in hand, beneath a foreign sky. Perhaps you sit shackled in a Roman cell, head bowed beneath the weight of memory. Or perhaps, more cruelly, you still breathe freely, yet choose silence, letting your absence answer all questions I dared not ask aloud. If this letter never reaches you, let it be known that I wrote it anyway, because some truths must be spoken, even into the void. If the parchment curls in flame before ever leaving this room, if the ink smudges into unreadable blur, if no messenger is ever dispatched, still I will have written it. I will have offered my voice to the wind and trusted it might carry something of me to wherever you are. I have often wondered what becomes of unsent letters. Do they live on in the ether? Do they curl into dreams, tugging at the corners of the heart like a song we think we've forgotten? Or are they simply gone, lost in the same way a sigh vanishes, or the warmth left on a pillow fades by morning? If this letter never finds you, let it at least find the river. I will offer it to the Nile, folded with care, weighted by a stone. I will watch it sink slowly into the water's arms, as I have sunk into memory. And the Nile, who has carried so much of us, will carry it too. Sometimes I imagine a different world. One where your ship sails into the harbor unthreatened, where you take my hand in daylight without fear, where our children grow tall under skies not clouded by conquest. In this world I do not write letters from shadowed rooms. I speak to you freely. I speak to you often. But that world is not ours. Ours is a world of walls and whispers, of kingdoms born to fall, of love made from torn maps and sleepless nights. And so I write, even now, even knowing the silence may be my only reply. Perhaps some future scholar will find this letter tucked into the folds of a scroll, or beneath the stone floor of a forgotten room. Perhaps they will read it not as confession, but as curiosity. They will wonder who I was, who you were, whether we were myth or memory. Let them wonder. Let them find in my words the ache of a woman who ruled a nation and still bowed before love. Let them see not only Cleopatra, queen of the Nile, but Cleopatra, writer of midnight letters to a man who changed the rhythm of her breath. If this letter never reaches you, let it reach the gods. Let them hear what I could not say aloud. Let them carry my truth to whatever realm you now walk. I have written of sorrow, of children and shadows, of scents and war, and the unbearable quiet of nights without you. But this, now, is something more, a final breath. If you are alive, know this. I waited, not as queen, not as symbol, but as myself. If you are dead, know this. I loved you, not for what you gave, not for what you represented, but for what you revealed when you let the world fall away. If you have forgotten me, know this. I remember enough for us both, and that is the burden I choose to carry. I have left this letter unsealed, perhaps foolishly, perhaps in hope. If the Nile takes it, so be it. If the stars ignore it, so be it. But if by some twist of fate you should read these words, even just one line, let it be this. I loved you, not in spite of the world, but because of it. And if the only hands to ever hold this page are mine, then may my final comfort be that I said it, that I dared write what silence never allowed me to speak. Good night, my love, wherever you are, whatever you have become. Know that these words were always yours. There will come a time, perhaps sooner than I wish, when our names are no longer spoken with certainty. The statues will crumble, the scrolls will fade, and the voices that once echoed in marble halls will quiet into dust. What remains will not us, but versions of us. Tales spun by those who never knew the shape of your laughter or the scent of my hair after bathing. History has no obligation to the truth. It chooses drama over nuance, power over tenderness. They will say you were undone by love. They will say I was a temptress, a serpent draped in silk, a queen who lured a Roman into ruin. They will write that we fell because we wanted too much. They will not say we loved. They will not see the silence between us, the knowing looks, the shared stillness, the reverence in your hands when you traced the line of my spine.
They will not feel the hush of our children's breaths as we watched them sleep. They will not know the ache that colored every choice, every compromise, every moment of tenderness wrapped in danger. They will forget, too, the gentleness with which you once took my hand, not in passion, but in fatigue. The way we leaned into each other, not as rulers, but as people who were tired, so tired, of holding up the weight of empires. I think of how they will shape us, sculptors of legend with no memory of touch. Will they paint you as fool or traitor? Will they see me as queen or myth? Will they bind us together in tragedy, or erase the string that ever connected us at all? You told me once that every empire must fall. But what of the people inside it? What happens to the man who dreamed beneath a war banner, or the woman who traced her sorrow into letters that no one read? We become echoes, fragments, a line in a scroll, a question without a voice. I wonder if one day a child will walk the ruins of this palace, their sandals stirring the dust, their fingers brushing against broken stone. Will they sense something? Will they pause in a corridor and feel the breath of what was? A warmth, a whisper, a sadness they cannot name. That will be us, not in marble, not in gold, but in the ache that lingers where love once lived. The philosophers say memory fades, but emotion is eternal. Perhaps that is how we will endure, not as dates in history, but as feelings that stir in those who do not know why their chest tightens as they read our story. That will be us, not in marble, not in gold, but in the ache that lingers where love once lived. The philosophers say memory fades, but emotion is eternal. Perhaps that is how we will endure, not as dates in history, but as feelings that stir in those who do not know why their chest tightens as they read our story. There is an irony to it all, that we who once commanded ships and cities may live longer in someone's sigh than in any monument, that our legacy may be preserved not in triumph, but in longing. Sometimes I fear I will not even be remembered as Cleopatra, that my name will be softened by time, mispronounced, misunderstood, that I will be reduced to the curve of a nose or the rumor of seduction. But you will remember me. Wherever your soul drifts, into the underworld or to the stars, or into the river, I know you will remember, not just my face, but my silence, my strength, my surrender, the way I wept only once and only with you. And I will remember you, not the warrior, not the politician, but the man who sat barefoot on the library steps reading Sappho aloud to make me laugh. The man who hated olives but ate them anyway because I placed them on your plate. The man who once pressed his forehead to mine and said nothing, and in that nothing gave me everything. If the world forgets, let it. If the chroniclers twist our tale into something unrecognizable, so be it. We lived, we breathed, we touched. Let that be enough. I will not chase legacy. I will not carve my name deeper into the stone than it wishes to stay. But I will write. I will press ink into parchment until the end. And perhaps in that act, I will leave something no empire can erase. A woman
waiting. A letter unwritten and rewritten 100 times. A name spoken softly in a darkened room. This may be the last letter I ever compose. Tomorrow may bring fire, or silence, or the sea. But tonight I sit beneath a flickering lamp, listening to the Nile breathe, and I say your name one more time, not for history, but for myself. The lamp burns low now. The flame is no longer steady. It flickers like a heartbeat nearing its last, casting long shadows across the papyrus before me. My hand, once so sure, now trembles. Whether from exhaustion or knowing, I cannot say, but still I write. The room is silent, save for the soft scratch of the quill. Outside, the night breathes gently. The Nile continues its eternal motion, unaware of the stillness gathering within these walls. I envy its indifference. I envy its distance. It has seen kingdoms rise and crumble, and still it flows, never asking who ruled, only carrying away what time no longer needs. This letter is nearly finished. Perhaps I, too, am nearly finished. I do not write these final words for history. I write them because my body needs to speak before it becomes memory. My thoughts have poured through my fingers for so long that I no longer know where I end and the ink begins. This letter has become a part of me, as much as any breath I've taken. If it is the last thing I leave behind, then let it be whole. The guards do not knock. They have learned that silence is my final wish. The candles at the edge of the room have guttered, leaving only this one. Its light dances against the ceiling, where your shadow once lingered as you read aloud from Horace, your voice soft with sleep. My crown lies untouched beside me. The gold has cooled. It no longer matters. What weight is a crown to a woman who has already surrendered everything but her name? The fig tree in the courtyard bore fruit again this year. The same tree we stood beneath so long ago, when everything still felt possible. I watched a bird perch there this morning, pluck one of the fruits and fly away. The skin split in its beak, sweet juice trailing behind. I watched until it disappeared. No guards, no advisors, just that moment, untouched by power, untouched by war. I wish I could send this letter with wings. I wish it could float to you across the waters into your hands. But perhaps it is better that it remains here, rooted where it was written. I would not want to force my words into a world that no longer knows us. If someone finds this page one day, let them not rush through it. Let them read it aloud, slowly, as if reciting a prayer. Let them feel the ink, the breath between sentences, the quiet hope behind the sorrow. Let them know that even queens die not only in blood, but in longing. I have laid aside the oils. The asps wait in their basket, calm, ancient. They do not know what they are about to become. Neither do I, truly. But I am not afraid. Fear left me the day I realized that love would outlive my reign, that something of you would remain, not in temples or stories, but in the slow exhale of a woman writing in the dark, knowing the end and choosing her words anyway. If this is my final act, let it be done with intention, with dignity, with love.
I place the quill down now. My fingers are stained with ink. My chest rises slowly, steadily, and the papyrus, still warm beneath my hand, rests quiet, waiting to dry. The flame has gone out now. In the stillness, the scent of ink and lotus lingers in the air, like a fading memory. The quill rests beside the papyrus, its tip stained with all that was unsaid. The parchment no longer stirs. It sleeps now, as I do. The chamber is dim, cast in gentle shadows that no longer reach for tomorrow.
The silence has grown soft, no longer heavy, no longer waiting, just soft, like the rustle of linen, like the hush of breath between dreams. Outside, the Nile moves slowly, not as a river, but as a thought, an old one that loops and drifts and carries what we leave behind. The moonlight touches its surface and does not stay. Nothing does. Not the stars, not the names carved into stone, not even the voices once crowned in gold. The crown rests quietly in the dust. The children sleep, the palace sleeps. Even memory now begins to fold into itself, smoothing the edges, dimming the sharp colors of grief and love, blending them into something calmer, something slower. And you, if you hear this, know that I have stopped searching for your shadow in the room. The candles are cold, the ink has dried, the last line has been written. Good night, traveler of time. May your dreams carry the hush of papyrus, the weight of moonlight on stone, and the soft breath of the Nile as it passed through a queen's final chamber. And may the morning find you rested in the footprints we left across the sleeping sands of history. Shh, the letter is closed, the hands are still, and the story sleeps.